A tough guy points a gun at a lady's chest, but when she whispers his name, his whole world flips. And that's how their super cool story of love and second chances starts in the Wild West. That's the hook that'll grab you, pal. Let's see what happens. He pointed a gun at her chest, but when she whispered his name, everything changed. Dry, hollow, New Mexico, spring of 1876. The wind that day carried not just dust, but memory. It scraped low against weathered storefronts, rattled the loose, cross above the town's lone chapel, and left a red veil over the land. Dry Hollow had always been a place of forgetting, of letting the desert swallow what men no longer wished to name. But this afternoon, it remembered. Eli Boone rode in with the dust. His coat was sun-bleached and frayed at the hem. The brim of his hat bent downward to shade eyes that no longer blinked at death. Years had dried up the softness in him, leaving behind a man carved from war, betrayal, and bounty. He did not tether his horse outside the saloon or sheriff's office. He turned toward the chapel because the name on his wanted poster whispered that direction. The old wooden doors stood crooked, one hinge rusted. The last time Eli had walked through them, he'd been a boy with callous palms and a heart too full. That day he had stood beside his father as men of God passed sentence, banishing them from the town they'd helped build. That same night, his father was hanged outside of Laredo on a false charge, and Dry Hollow forgot. But Eli Boone never did. Now he stepped off his horse like a man crossing into memory. One boot hit the ground, then the next. His spurs did not jingle, they scraped. And as he crossed the threshold of the church, pushing open the door with one shoulder, his hand rested not on prayer but on the cold iron of a Colt holstered at his hip. The air inside was cooler, filled with the scent of pine pews and old paper. Shafts of sunlight cut through stained glass, dyeing the dust red and gold. The congregation was small, scattered faces turning in surprise. But Eli's eyes scanned past them, past the altar, past the pulpit, and settled on the figure rising from a shadowed pew halfway down the aisle. She moved slowly, neither fearful nor bold, just certain. A woman, of slender grace framed by soft brown hair, pulled into a braid that glinted in the sun. She wore a simple dress, the color of sky before storm. Her hands clasped before her like a prayer held too long. It was Catherine Wren, the girl who once placed a pressed flower in his Bible. The girl whose hand he'd held behind the old barn, who had cried into his neck when the town exiled his family. The girl who said she'd wait. Now she stood before him as a woman, one the town still respected, perhaps even feared for her unwavering truth. But what undid him was not how she had changed. It was how she had not. Eli's fingers brushed the handle of his gun. She saw it. Still, she stepped closer, her voice quiet but full. Eli, you're back. He did not speak. Not yet. The name, his name, fell from her lips like a memory finding its way home. His jaw tightened. The Colt lifted an inch from his holster. Step aside, Catherine. She did not move. Her eyes held the weight of years, but they did not flinch. That's not who you are. There was no tremble in her words, no plea, only knowing. Eli Boone had killed men for less than a breath of defiance, had drawn and fired without hesitation. But now, with his weapon half raised and his path standing directly in its line, his arms stalled. It was not her beauty that stopped him. It was not the way the sunlight rimmed her silhouette like a halo carved from old forgiveness. It was her eyes. They did not see a killer. They still saw him. In that instant, every bullet he had ever loaded, every name crossed from his ledger, every sleepless mile ridden across a brutal land. None of it seemed heavier than the sound of his own name spoken as. If it still meant something, his hand dropped. not with weakness, but with finality. And somewhere in the deepest part of him, the part buried under blood and time, a single thought rose like a tide against stone, she remembered, and that was enough to make him forget, if only for one sacred second. Why, he came outside the chapel bell, let out a single hollow note, perhaps stirred by the wind or by the weight of something unseen. Eli Boone stepped back into the sunlight, but his mind remained in shadow. Dry Hollow had barely changed. The same leaning fences, the same dust-beblown porches, the same brittle cottonwoods that never grew taller. But he had changed. Or maybe he had only become more of what this town once made him. He walked past the general store with its faded signs, the saloon, where his father was denied a drink the day before the hanging, and the empty blacksmith shop that once rang with the hammer of honest labor. His boots crunched over gravel, but his thoughts were somewhere further back, before the war, before the blood, before the bounty lists. When he was a boy, the shop had smelled of smoke and hot metal. His father's hands, calloused and burned, had taught him to swing a hammer. Before he learned to write his name, they were poor, dirt poor. But his father walked upright, spoke straight, and believed that truth always found its way. It never did. Eli still remembered the morning the sheriff came, how his father was accused of stealing a gold watch from Judge Radica's son. No trial, no mercy, just a rope and a tree outside the courthouse. He remembered how the town's people averted their eyes, how the preacher mumbled words no one listened to. Most of all, he remembered Catherine, 15 years old, in a blue dress, gripping his hand so tightly it hurt. "Don't let this place turn you mean," she had whispered. But it had. After the hanging, Eli left Dry Hollow. He didn't look back until war came. Like many boys from broken towns, he enlisted with the Confederacy, not out of politics, but out of rage. He became a scout, quick on a horse, quicker with a knife. In the woods of Georgia, in the hills of Tennessee, he learned to move without sound, to read signs like scripture, and with every patrol, every ambush, something in him grew quieter, harder. When the war ended, he could have returned. He almost did. He even got as far as Santa Fe once, stood outside a telegraph office, a crumpled piece of paper in hand. Catherine's name, a letter never sent. He told himself it was pride that he had nothing to offer her, but in truth, it was shame. He had promised her he would come back a man worth loving. Instead, he became the kind of man she would cross the street to avoid. The first bounty came easy, just a thief with a knife, the second harder. By the fifth, he stopped asking, why? The names became lines on paper, faces in dust. He rode alone, slept light, trusted no one. The years dulled his hope, sharpened his edge, and yet through it all, her face stayed untouched in his memory. Not as she might be now, but as she was. Eyes like riverstones, voice like the hush before dawn. He thought of her when the desert got too still. He saw her in the flames when he lit a campfire, and sometimes when blood stained his hands, he whispered her name, not as prayer, but as penance. And now 10 years. Later there she was, not a dream, not a ghost, real and worse, unchanged. That was the part that undid him. Not the years she wore on her face, not the calm she carried like armor. It was that she still looked at him like he was worth something, like the boy who once gave her a necklace made of scrap iron, and string might still be somewhere inside the killer she now faced. He could not bear it. Eli leaned against a wooden post near the old water trough, the leather of his gloves creaking softly as he clenched his fists. He had faced gunmen, deserters, and worse. But nothing ever left his knees this week. Catherine Wren had not forgotten him, and that somehow was more terrifying than being forgotten. Midnight, And Dry Hollow was not darkness, but a pale, haunted quiet bathed in moonlight and old dust. The chapel on the hill stood awake, its windows glowing faintly against the silence of the sleeping town. Eli Boone did not tie his horse. He moved on foot past weather-worn headstones, leaning into time. Names he once knew stared back from stone, like waiting for him to speak them. Again. The chapel door creaked beneath his hand. Inside, the air was warm with wax and cedar. The pews were empty, but one figure moved, kneeling over the floor with a cloth and a bowl of water. "Catherine." She did not flinch. The candle beside her flickered across her cheekbones, the same ones he remembered tracing in summers past. "You stayed," Eli said, voice like gravel. She did not look up. Someone had to. He stepped closer, slow. "You should hate me." She paused, then lifted her eyes. No anger, no defense, just quiet. "I never learned how." The words didn't accuse. They forgave without trying to. She stood and walked to the small stove near the altar. With practiced hands, she set water to boil and pulled down a single chipped mug. No sugar, no milk, just black, just how he had always taken it. She handed it to him without ceremony. Her fingers brushed his warm and steady. He held the cup like it was heavier than it looked. "I shouldn't have come," he said. "But you did," she answered. The silence between them said more than all the words he could never manage. He sank onto the front pew, shoulders sagging under the weight of years, of war, of grief, of her. She knelt. Beside him, her fingers reached for his arm, brushing against the rough wool of his coat. He stiffened, not from pain, but memory. She rolled up his sleeve. There, a dark bruise bloomed over old scar tissue. Her eyes did not widen. She only opened a small tin from her apron, dipped 2 fingers into pine-scented salve, and began to work it, gently into his skin. Her hands moved with the same care she'd shown once long ago, when he had fallen from her father's roof. She had hidden his pain back then, just as she tended it now, not because he deserved it, but because some things do not unlearn tenderness. Ellie watched her, not her hands, but the way her mouth pressed, into silence, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way she still smelled faintly of lavender. She didn't ask questions, didn't lecture. She simply stayed. And in that small act, in that sob and silence, Eli felt something loosen in his chest that no bullet had ever touched. He closed his eyes and breathed her in, as if her presence could remind him of the man he used to be. And for the first time in a long, long while, he let himself believe he still could be. The morning sun in Dry Hollow rose slow and red, casting the chapel windows in a glow like blood warming over glass. Dust motes floated through the beams of light, and outside a lone hawk circled high above the cottonwoods. Eli Boone had not slept. He stood behind the altar near the faded velvet of the pulpit, his boots silent on worn floorboards. A storm had begun inside him, one he had long tried to outrun across deserts and blood-soaked trails, but could not escape here. He had seen the wanted poster again just hours before, folded at the bottom of his satchel, worn along the creases, a younger face, sharper, wilder, but unmistakable, Samuel Wren. He had not expected this. He had not come for this, but the truth stood plain as ink on bounty paper. The man he had been hired to bring in, dead or alive, was Catherine's brother, a thief, a runaway, a man with blood on his hands, and hiding here. Eli waited in the shadows of the chapel until the sound of soft footsteps came from the side hall. Catherine appeared with a pail of water, her eyes still tired from the weight of what had passed between them the night before. She paused when she saw him standing there, rigid, silent, holding the folded paper in his hand like a verdict. "You knew," he said. His voice was low, not cruel, but cold, like a steel blade left in river water. Catherine did not answer at first. She set the pail down. Her shoulders fell. "I knew," she said. He stepped forward. "How long since the winter?" she whispered. "He came back sick. No money. No friends. Just shame." Her voice broke. "He's my brother, Eli. He made mistakes, but he is not a monster." "A man died in Tucson because of that mistake," Eli said, tossing the poster onto the pew beside her. "You think I get to pick and choose who I turn in?" Catherine stared down at the crumpled paper, her hands clenched around the pal's rim. "I know what he did," she said, "but I also know why. After our father died, he wandered. He fell in with men who didn't care what lines they crossed. He tried to leave. Them. They turned on him." Eli shook his head. "You're asking me to forget what I came here for." "No," she said softly. "I'm asking you to remember who you were before they taught you how to aim without feeling. That hit harder than he let show." He turned away, walked to the front of the chapel where the stained glass window cast colors on his coat. His jaw tightened, his fingers twitched at the holster. Years of instinct screamed that delay was danger. Sympathy was weakness, but her voice, the way it cracked when she said his name, kept echoing in his ears. He had taken men in for less, killed for less. But this was not just another name on a poster. Samuel Wren was family to her, and Catherine Wren was the last piece of his soul. Still, unbroken. He turned back to her, eyes dark as the sky before a monsoon. "I'm giving him one night," he said. "Tell him to ride north, leave the territory, disappear. If he's smart, he'll never show his face in New Mexico again." Catherine stepped closer. "Thank you." But Eli held up a hand. "No," he said, "you do not thank me. Because if I see him again, if he draws on someone, if he lays harm to another soul, Catherine, I will not blink twice." She nodded. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but not fear. "I understand." He looked at her long and hard, then added quietly, "And if I come after him again, you do not stand in my way." Catherine swallowed. She didn't speak, but the silence between them was a covenant deeper than any vow. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in town, a dog barked. Life went on in Dry Hollow, merciless and blind. But inside the chapel, two souls stood on a line as thin as grace. Eli turned to leave, but not before glancing once more at her, at the woman who still remembered how he took his coffee, who still saw something worth saving. Beneath the scars, for her, he would risk his name, but not his word. The wind shifted that afternoon, dry and sudden, like something cruel had stirred beneath the dirt. It carried the scent of gun oil and sweat long before the boots hit the edge. Of Dry Hollow, they rode in without a word. 4 shadows in cracked leather and dust-worn coats, faces half-covered, eyes hard from too many desert nights. They didn't go to the saloon. They didn't ask for rooms. They went straight to the church because they weren't here to drink or pray. They were here to finish something. The men had once ridden with Samuel Wren. Now they came to erase him. Loose ends don't live long in outlawed tongues, and one of them had heard about Eli Boone's return. A bounty hunter hiding a wanted man was either a fool or worse. Eli had felt it before he saw them, before the shots. A gut-wisting shift in the air, a silence too thick for a town this old. He was walking the back cemetery behind the chapel, boots crunching over gravel and dry twigs when the first bullet sang past his shoulder. He dropped low, behind a headstone, Colt in hand before he had fully drawn breath. Dust exploded around him as gunfire tore through the stillness. One of the bastards was already dead before he hit the ground. Eli's aim hadn't dulled, but there were more. He rolled across the dirt, took another shot, caught one in the thigh. The scream echoed down the hill. A slug grazed Eli's side, tearing a strip from his coat and burning into flesh just below the ribs. He staggered, but did not fall. Then came a voice. Low, urgent. Lay, this way, Catherine. She was standing in the side door of the chapel, skirt hitched, face pale, but calm. She didn't flinch at the sound of shots, just held the door open like she'd done it before. Eli didn't argue. He made it through just as another round buried into the doorframe behind him. Inside, it smelled of wax and old wood. The candles had gone out. Catherine pulled him behind the altar, her hands steady. She lifted the trap door beneath the communion table, a forgotten storm cellar once used for storing preserves. She helped him climb, down the creaking ladder and followed, pulling the door shut behind her. Mason inhaled a shudder and looked out at the blazing boatyard. In darkness swallowed them. She lit a single match. The flicker danced across his bloodied shirt. I need to see the wound, she said. Eli nodded, breathing through gritted teeth. She cut the shirt away with an old fruit knife, pressed a cloth to the wound. He hissed but did not scream. He watched her face, focused, urgent, kind, the way her brow furrowed when she wrapped the linen, the way her fingers knew pressure and mercy in equal measure. You should have let me take the damn poster, he muttered. You would have bled out before reaching the saloon, she replied. Then silence, only their breath and the creak of beams above. Blood slowed. The sting settled. His head dropped back against the cellar wall. The match went out. He faded, slipping between pain and memory. Then, through the dark, his lips moved. I never stopped loving you, he whispered. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even meant for her ears. But she heard it. She didn't speak, didn't touch him. She only sat there beside him in the dark, a single tear tracking down her cheek. Silent, but full of all the things he had never said and all the ways she had waited anyway. Above them, the outlaws searched. Footsteps crossed the floor, voices cursed, then silence again. They were gone for now, but beneath the chapel, in the hollow, of dust and firelight, something wounded had finally spoken, and something waiting had finally listened. The church bell rang once, sharp, metallic, though no one had pulled the rope. It was the wind or fate, or maybe just the tremble of something holy, bracing for blood. Outside, the outlaws had returned, all three of them. Dust clung to their coats, sun behind their backs like fire catching in their rifles. The townsfolk had long since retreated, behind shutters, praying with breath held. The only sound was the soft creak of leather and the faint cry of a crow above the steeple. They stood in front of the chapel, guns drawn. We know he's in there, one of them called out voice. Samuel Wren, bring him out or we'll burn this house down with you in it. Inside, Eli stood with blood soaking through the left side of his shirt, his weight pressed against the heavy oak door. His breath was shallow, but his grip on the revolver never wavered. He looked back only once. Catherine stood behind him, hands trembling, eyes wide with a storm of fear and fury. You're bleeding, she said, voice thin as paper. I've bled worse, he replied. She moved closer. Please don't do this. I already left once, he said. I won't run again. His voice broke on the last word. The pain in his ribs throbbed like war drums. But what hurt more was the terror in her eyes. Terror not of him, but for him. And that was something he no longer felt he deserved. I can talk to them, she said. They won't shoot a woman. No, he snapped, more from fear than anger. You stay behind me. He pushed the door open slowly. The heat hit like a wave. Sunlight bleached the church steps. He stepped forward, boots scuffing old wood, every movement ringing louder than a gunshot. The outlaws raised their weapons. "Don't be stupid, Boone," one snarled. "We just want the boy. You'll have to go through me. That can be arranged." But before another word passed, a voice rang out from within. "I'm here." Everyone turned. From the shadows of the chapel door, Samuel Wren stepped into the light. No gun, no hat, just sweat on his brow and guilt on his face. "I'm here," he said again, louder now. "But you don't touch him, or my sister. Sam!" No, Catherine's scream cracked the air, but he kept walking. Then, like thunder cracking stone, came the shot. Not from Eli, not from Samuel, from one of the outlaws. Samuel fell to his knees, clutching his side. Blood spread fast over his shirt. Hine broke. Catherine ran forward, screaming, her dress catching on the step. She reached her brother just before he hit the dirt. "No, no, Sam, please, another shot." This one came from Eli. The outlaw who'd fired was dead before he hit the dust. The other two scattered behind barrels and saddles, ducking for cover. Eli moved on instinct, his legs screaming, ribs ablaze. He dropped beside Catherine, shielded her body with his gun still raised. But she wasn't looking at him. Her hands were pressed to her brother's wound, shaking with blood. "Stay. With me, Sam. Stay with me, please." Samuel coughed, eyes fluttering. I didn't mean to. He was going to die." "You saved him," Catherine whispered. Behind them, Eli kept firing 2 more shots clean and fast. One outlaw fell, the other dropped his gun and raised his hands. "I'm done. I'm done." "Then ride," Eli growled, "and don't come back." The man ran like death was on his heels. Then silence returned to Dry Hollow. Only the soft sobs of a sister holding her brother. Eli dropped to one knee, the world spinning now. He touched Catherine's shoulder. "Is he?" "He's alive," she said, voice shaking. "But we need help," he nodded, teeth clenched. "I'll go. Just keep pressure on it." She looked up at him, tears streaming. "You came back, Eli. You stayed." He nodded again, chest heaving. "Yeah, this time I stayed." He turned, blood soaking down his side, but he didn't falter. He had stood between death and love, and for the first time in years, he had chosen the right side. The morning after the gunfire smelled like ash and rust. Smoke still hung in the rafters of the old church, like the ghost of something unholy that had not yet decided to leave. The pews were splintered where bullets had struck. And blood. Samuel's blood still stained the threshold where he had collapsed like a man surrendering to his past. But the sun had risen. Outside, the world breathed again. A soft wind stirred the dust where men had fallen. Crows circled, but did not land. Dry Hollow as it always had endured. Inside the church, Samuel lay on a cot near the altar, chest bandaged, face pale but breathing. The doctor had come and gone. He would live, they said. The bullet had missed his heart, but not by much. It would be a long recovery. Catherine had not left his side. Her dress was stained. Her voice from tears, but her hands remained steady. She moved with quiet purpose, cooling his brow with cloth, spooning him water when he stirred. Eli stood by the doorway, not quite inside, not quite gone. His arm was wrapped, the shoulder wound. Clean, but still raw. The pain was not in his body. It never had been. It sat deeper in marrow and memory, in the place where years of silence and running had hardened into something like guilt. He watched Catherine with her brother and said nothing. But she looked up and her eyes found his. "You saved him," she said simply. He shook his head. "He saved me first." She didn't argue. When Samuel fell asleep again, Catherine walked to the altar. The light through the stained glass caught her hair like fire-caught wind. Eli followed slower. They stood in silence, the kind only 2 people who had watched the world fall apart could share. "I'll take him in," Eli finally said. "There's a marshal in San Miguel. Fair man. I'll strike a deal for mercy. He'll answer for what he did, but maybe there's still a path forward." Catherine turned to him, her face unreadable. "You'll bring him back if he's allowed to come home?" "Yes." She studied his face as if looking for something she once knew. "And you?" "I'll come back too," he said. "If you want me to." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Catherine stepped closer, so close he could smell the faint sweetness of the lavender oil she still used. Her hand reached for his calloused now from a decade of winters and violence. She closed her fingers around his like closing a door behind her. "When I come back," he whispered, voice rough, uncertain. "If you'll have me?" Her answer came without hesitation, quiet and sure as morning rain. "You were always mine to begin with." He looked away for a moment, blinking hard. Then, as if remembering, something lost in time, he reached into his coat. From a pocket long forgotten, he pulled out a small wooden cross worn smooth by years of movement, the carving shallow but still visible. He stepped toward the altar and placed it on the stone shelf. "Where candles had once stood, I made this," he said, barely more than a breath. "For you before I left. I thought I lost it." Catherine touched it with her fingertips. "You didn't." Eli turned to leave. He did not want to, but there were debts to settle, promises to keep. His hand lingered on the doorframe as if trying to draw strength from the wood. Catherine watched him go with tears in her eyes, not of loss, but of something like hope. And when he stepped out into the light, the dust rose behind his boots. But for the first time in 10 years, it did not feel like he was leaving. It felt like he was on his way back. 6 months passed like a slow turning wheel over soft earth. Spring came to Dry Hollow, not with a shout, but a hush, a gentler kind of resurrection. The sun melted the last memory of winter off the rooftops, and the dust that once clung to every window pane gave way to golden light and the scent of blooming sage. The town no longer felt haunted by the past. It felt waiting. The chapel had been painted by hand. You could still see the uneven brush strokes on the beams where the wood had split. Scars left visible, not hidden. The pews had been repaired with nails that didn't quite match, but the floor no longer creaked like it mourned. Children ran across it now, their laughter rising up with a sound of hymns, and the bell in the steeple no longer tolled like grief. It rang like a call home. On the church steps, Catherine Wren sat in a pale blue dress, the same soft hue as the sky above. In her hands was an old, worn Bible, its spine cracked and familiar. But her eyes were not on the page. They were fixed on the horizon, on the road that curled westward through the grassland. And then she saw him. Eli Boone didn't wear his gun belt. No coat, no spurs, no shadows of the bounty hunter he'd once been. Just a plain linen shirt rolled to the elbows, trousers still dusty from the ride, and in his calloused hands a bundle of wild flowers, yellow, purple, white, the same ones she used to gather, as a girl near the stream where the cottonwoods leaned. He stopped just past the chapel gate, like a man unsure if his feet were welcome, though his heart had already crossed. Catherine stood, slow but sure. She didn't run, didn't speak. Her smile rose like the sun itself, and her steps down the worn wooden stairs made no sound at all, as though the earth remembered her weight and held her gently. When they met in the space between silence and mourning, Eli reached for her, not with urgency, but with reverence. His arms around her were neither apology nor promise, just presence, just a man who had once lost himself and had found the way back by the sound of her name. No tears came, no dramatic gasp, only the quiet exhale of two souls, long separated, breathing the same breath again. Later that evening, when the sky turned to molten amber and the last of the sun spilled across the pasture, They sat on the back porch of the chapel, where the world felt smaller and safer. Catherine made stew with beans and salt pork, the kind Eli used to crave after long rides. He didn't ask for it, she just remembered. He sharpened an old blade with steady hands, the wet stone hissing like cicadas in the dust. In his pocket was a small silver ring, simple, worn, waiting. He did not give it that night. He did not need to. Timing, like healing, had its own rhythm. Their conversation was quiet, broken only by soft laughter and the clink of spoons. No grand declarations, no sweeping vows, just a shared meal, a shared silence. When Eli reached across the table and touched her hand, just barely, his fingers grazing hers, it was enough. Enough. To say, I am not leaving. Enough to say, this time we get to stay. Outside, the wind moved gently through the window like it had nowhere better to be. Horses nickered in the distance. Somewhere a child laughed in their sleep. The fire between them no longer burned to consume. It warmed slow, steady, a hearth, not a blaze. And as the stars blinked into the velvet sky, Dry Hollow slept easy, because the lost had returned, because love, when it is true, always finds its way home. Thank you for walking with us through this tale of broken promises, whispered names, and the quiet kind of love that waits even through war and silence. In the dust of Dry Hollow, one man laid down his gun not because he was weak, but because a woman's faith reminded him who he used to be. And sometimes the most powerful return is not to a place, but to a person. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you believe love can survive distance, death, and time, subscribe to Legends of the Wild West Stories for more unforgettable journeys across the American frontier, where justice rides slow, but love always finds its way home. Hit the bell so you never miss a story that lingers long after the dust settles. The most powerful return is not to a place, but to a person. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you believe love can survive distance, death, and time, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more unforgettable journeys across the American frontier where justice rides slow, but love always finds its way home. Hit the bell so you never miss a story that lingers long after the dust settles.